The late afternoon sun cast long shadows across the manicured lawn of the Thompson estate as I made my way up the winding driveway. My heart raced with a mix of excitement and apprehension, the gravel crunching beneath my feet with each step. The grand Victorian mansion loomed before me, its windows glowing warmly in the fading light. This was supposed to be my night, a celebration in my honor, but something in the pit of my stomach told me things weren't quite as they seemed. As I reached the ornate front door, it swung open before I could even knock. Aunt Maggie stood there, her face beaming with a smile that didn't quite reach her eyes. "Oh, darling, you're here at last," she exclaimed, pulling me into a tight embrace that smelled of expensive perfume and secrets. "Everyone's waiting for you inside. Come, come." I allowed myself to be ushered into the grand foyer, where the chandelier sparkled overhead and the polished marble floor reflected the light like a mirror. The sound of laughter and clinking glasses drifted from the direction of the dining room, and as we approached, I could feel the weight of expectations settling on my shoulders like a heavy cloak. The dining room was a sight to behold. Crystal glasses gleamed on the long mahogany table, which was adorned with elaborate floral centerpieces and silver candelabras. The walls were lined with oil paintings of stern-faced ancestors, their eyes seeming to follow me as I entered the room. A banner hung across the far wall, proclaiming, "Congratulations, Alex," in gold letters. As soon as I stepped through the doorway, a chorus of cheers erupted. "There's our star," boomed Uncle Robert, raising his glass in a toast. Cousin Emily rushed forward to give me a hug, her perfect teeth flashing in a practiced smile. "We're so proud of you," she whispered in my ear, but there was an edge to her voice that made me wonder if she really meant it. I made my way around the room, accepting congratulations and well wishes from relatives I hadn't seen in years. Each handshake felt like a test, each smile a mask hiding ulterior motives. I couldn't shake the feeling that this was all an elaborate performance, with me as the unwitting lead actor. "Alex, darling," my mother called from across the room. She glided over, elegant in her designer dress, and took my arm. "Come, sit down. We have so much to celebrate tonight." She guided me to the head of the table, where a high-backed chair awaited me like a throne. As I took my seat, I noticed a small envelope placed discreetly next to my plate. My name was written on it in flowing script, and I felt a chill run down my spine. Somehow, I knew that this innocent-looking piece of paper held the key to understanding the true purpose of this gathering. The dinner began, and course after course of exquisite food was served. Conversation flowed freely, punctuated by laughter and the occasional clink of silverware against china. I played my part, smiling and nodding at all the right moments, but my mind was racing. Every compliment seemed to carry a double meaning. Every anecdote felt carefully rehearsed. "Remember when Alex was just a little tyke, always getting into mischief?" Uncle Robert chuckled, swirling his wine glass. "Who would have thought our troublemaker would turn out to be such a success?" Aunt Maggie chimed in. "Oh, but we always knew, didn't we? Alex has always been special. That's why tonight is so important." I felt my cheeks flush, partly from the praise and partly from the growing suspicion that this celebration was about more than just my recent achievements. The envelope by my plate seemed to grow heavier with each passing moment, its presence a constant reminder of the secrets that hung in the air like invisible smoke. As the main course was cleared away and dessert was served, my father stood up, tapping his glass for attention. The room fell silent, all eyes turning to him. "Friends, family," he began, his voice carrying the authority of a man used to being listened to. "We're here tonight to honor Alex, who has made us all so proud." He went on to list my accomplishments, from academic achievements to recent career successes. With each word of praise, I felt more and more like an imposter. Did I really deserve all this? Or was I just a pawn in some larger game I didn't yet understand? "And now," my father continued, his gaze meeting mine, "we have something very special to present to Alex. Something that will secure a bright future for the next generation of our family." This was it. The moment I had been dreading all evening. With trembling hands, I reached for the envelope, aware of the expectant hush that had fallen over the room. Inside was a single sheet of paper, covered in dense legal text. As I scanned the document, my heart sank. It was a waiver, a legal agreement to forfeit my share of the family inheritance in exchange for… what? The promise of independence? The illusion of making my own way in the world? I looked up, meeting the eager faces of my family members. They were all waiting, watching, their smiles now seeming more predatory than proud. In that moment, I realized that this entire evening had been orchestrated for this very purpose. The celebration, the praise, the reminiscing, it was all designed to soften me up, to make me more amenable to signing away my birthright. But even as this realization dawned on me, another thought took root. I wouldn't be their pawn. I wouldn't play into their hands so easily. With a calm I didn't know I possessed, I folded the paper and slipped it back into the envelope. "This is quite something," I said, careful to keep my voice neutral. "I think I'll need some time to look this over properly. After all, it's a big decision, isn't it?" I saw a flicker of frustration cross my father's face, quickly masked by an understanding nod. Of course," he said smoothly. "Take all the time you need. We're just happy to have you here with us tonight." The rest of the evening passed in a blur of forced smiles and meaningless small talk. As guests began to depart, each offering final congratulations and none too subtle reminders of family loyalty, I felt a strange mix of emotions. Anger at the manipulation, sadness at the realization that my family's love seemed conditional, and a growing determination to uncover the full extent of their plans. As I said my goodbyes and stepped out into the cool night air, I knew that this was just the beginning. The illusion of celebration had been shattered, revealing a web of deceit and hidden agendas. But I was no longer the naive relative they thought they could easily manipulate. I was ready to play their game and win. Walking down the driveway, the gravel crunching under my feet once more, I made a silent vow. I would get to the bottom of this, no matter what it took. The truth would come to light, and when it did, I would be ready. The real celebration, I realized, would come when I finally broke free from their machinations and stood on my own terms. With one last look at the grand house behind me, its windows now dark and uninviting, I stepped out onto the street. The night stretched before me, full of possibilities and challenges. Whatever came next, I knew one thing for certain: nothing would ever be the same again. The days following the party were a blur of conflicting emotions and nagging suspicions. I found myself replaying every moment, every conversation, searching for clues I might have missed. The more I thought about it, the more certain I became that there was more to this situation than met the eye. I decided to start my investigation at the local coffee shop, The Grind, where I often went to clear my head. As I sat in my usual corner booth, nursing a latte and staring out the window at the bustling street, I couldn't shake the feeling that I was being watched. It was probably just paranoia, but after the events of the party, I couldn't be too careful. "Hey, stranger," a familiar voice called out. I looked up to see my childhood friend, Mike, standing by my table with a steaming cup in hand. "Mind if I join you?" I gestured to the empty seat across from me, grateful for the company and the distraction from my thoughts. Mike slid into the booth, his easy smile a stark contrast to the tension I'd been carrying around for days. "So, how was the big family shindig?" he asked, taking a sip of his coffee. "I bet Aunt Maggie went all out with the decorations again, huh?" I hesitated, unsure of how much to reveal. Mike and I had been friends since elementary school, and if there was anyone I could trust, it was him. Still, the words stuck in my throat. It was interesting. I finally managed. "There's something going on with my family, Mike. Something big." Mike's brow furrowed with concern. "What do you mean? Did something happen at the party?" I leaned in closer, lowering my voice. "They presented me with some kind of legal document. A waiver for my inheritance, I think. But it was all so vague and rushed. I can't shake the feeling that they're trying to pull something over on me." Mike whistled low. "That's heavy, man. Have you talked to a lawyer about this?" I shook my head. "Not yet. I'm not even sure where to start. It's not just the document, either. It's the way they were all acting at the party. Like they were putting on a show, you know?" As I spoke, memories of past family gatherings began to surface. Little moments that hadn't seemed significant at the time suddenly took on new meaning. The hushed conversations that would stop abruptly when I entered a room. The way certain relatives would exchange glances when financial matters were discussed. "You remember my cousin Emily?" I asked Mike. He nodded, a slight grimace crossing his face. Emily had always been the golden child of the family, perfect in every way. At the party, she hugged me and said they were all proud of me. But there was something in her voice, something. I don't know, almost threatening. Mike leaned back, his expression thoughtful. "You know, now that you mention it, I've always gotten a weird vibe from your family gatherings. Remember that Christmas party a few years back? The one where your Uncle Robert got really drunk and started rambling about securing the family legacy or something." I did remember. At the time, we'd all laughed it off as the ramblings of a man who'd had too much eggnog. But now, in light of recent events, it took on a more sinister tone. "I think," I said slowly, the realization dawning on me as I spoke, that this has been in the works for a long time. The party, the document, it's all part of some larger plan. Mike nodded, his face serious. "So what are you going to do about it?" That was the million-dollar question, wasn't it? I sighed, running a hand through my hair. "I don't know yet, but I can't just sit back and let them manipulate me. I need to figure out what's really going on." As we continued to talk, brainstorming ideas and theories, I felt a mixture of dread and determination settling in my gut. Whatever my family was planning, I was going to get to the bottom of it. Over the next few weeks, I threw myself into uncovering the truth. I started by reaching out to some of the more distant relatives who hadn't been at the party, hoping they might have some insight into what was going on. My first call was to Great Aunt Beatrice, my grandmother's sister who lived in a small town upstate. Aunt Bea had always been a bit of an outsider in the family, known for her eccentricities and her tendency to speak her mind regardless of the consequences. "Alex, my dear," she exclaimed when she heard my voice on the phone. "What a lovely surprise. To what do I owe the pleasure?" I took a deep breath, steeling myself. "Aunt Bea, I need to ask you something. Have you heard anything about changes in the family? Anything to do with inheritances or the family business?" There was a long pause on the other end of the line. When Aunt Bea spoke again, her voice was low and serious. "Oh, Alex, I was hoping you'd never have to deal with all this nonsense. But I suppose it was only a matter of time." Over the next hour, Aunt Bea filled me in on years of family history I'd never known. She told me about old grudges, secret deals, and a long-standing plan to consolidate the family wealth under the control of a select few. "Your father and his siblings," she explained, "they've been working on this for years. They want to create a kind of family dynasty, I suppose you'd call it. But to do that, they need to make sure the next generation, your generation, doesn't have the power to interfere." My head was spinning by the time I hung up the phone. It was worse than I'd imagined. This wasn't just about my inheritance, it was about control over the entire family's future. Armed with this new information, I decided to take a more direct approach. I scheduled a lunch meeting with my Uncle Robert, ostensibly to discuss the document from the party. We met at an upscale restaurant in the financial district, the kind of place where deals were made over expensive steaks and martinis. As we settled into our seats, I could see Uncle Robert eyeing me warily. He'd always been the most business-savvy of my relatives, and I knew he'd be a tough nut to crack. "So, Alex," he began, his voice jovial but his eyes sharp. "Have you had a chance to look over that paperwork we gave you? Any questions?" I took a sip of water, buying myself a moment to collect my thoughts. "Actually, Uncle Robert, I do have some questions. Quite a few, in fact." I saw a flicker of something, surprise? Concern? Cross his face before he masked it with a smile. Of course. Ask away." Over the next hour, I carefully probed for information, watching his reactions and listening for what he wasn't saying as much as what he was. Uncle Robert was good. He deflected most of my questions with practiced ease, but I caught glimpses of the truth behind his carefully constructed facade. By the time we parted ways, I was more certain than ever that my family was hiding something big. The way Uncle Robert had tensed up when I mentioned Aunt Bea, the careful way he'd avoided any mention of the family business's long-term plans, it all pointed to a conspiracy larger than I'd initially suspected. As I walked back to my apartment, my mind was racing. I had pieces of the puzzle, but I still couldn't see the whole picture. What was the endgame here? And more importantly, how could I protect myself and potentially other family members from whatever they were planning? I spent the next few days poring over old family photos, financial records, anything I could get my hands on that might shed some light on the situation. I created a makeshift investigation board in my living room, connecting names and events with red string like something out of a detective movie. It was during this deep dive into family history that I stumbled upon something interesting. An old newspaper clipping, tucked away in a box of my grandmother's keepsakes, caught my eye. The headline read, "Local family embroiled in inheritance dispute." The article, dated nearly 40 years ago, detailed a legal battle between my grandfather and his brother over the family business. It was vague on the details, but reading between the lines, I could see echoes of the current situation. History, it seemed, was repeating itself. This discovery gave me a new lead to follow. If I could uncover the truth about what happened all those years ago, maybe I could understand what was happening now and find a way to stop it. As I sat back, surrounded by the evidence of decades of family secrets and lies, I felt a strange mix of emotions. Anger at the betrayal, sadness at the realization that my family's love seemed so conditional, and a fierce determination to uncover the truth and protect what was rightfully mine. I knew the road ahead wouldn't be easy. My family was powerful, connected, and clearly willing to go to great lengths to achieve their goals. But I was no longer the naive relative they thought they could easily manipulate. I was ready to fight back, to protect not just my own interests, but the true legacy of our family, one built on honesty and mutual respect, not greed and deceit. As the sun set outside my window, casting long shadows across my investigation board, I made a silent vow. I would get to the bottom of this, no matter what it took. The truth would come to light, and when it did, I would be ready. The real battle was just beginning, and I intended to win. The weeks of investigation had left me exhausted, but more determined than ever. I knew I was getting close to the truth, but I also realized that I needed to play my cards carefully. My family was expecting me to sign that waiver, and I had to make a decision on how to proceed. It was a crisp autumn morning when I received the call I'd been both dreading and anticipating. My father's voice on the other end of the line was casual, but I could detect the underlying tension. "Alex, we haven't heard from you about the paperwork," he said, cutting straight to the chase. "Your mother and I were hoping we could all get together this weekend to finalize everything. What do you say?" I took a deep breath, steeling myself for what was to come. "Sure, Dad," I replied, trying to keep my voice neutral. "Saturday afternoon work for you?" "Perfect," he said, the relief evident in his tone. "We'll see you at the house at 2 p.m. As I hung up the phone, my mind was already racing with plans. This was it, the moment of truth. I had to be prepared for anything. The next few days were a blur of preparation. I reached out to Mike, filling him in on my plan and asking him to be on standby in case things went south. I also made a discreet appointment with a lawyer just to understand my rights and options. When Saturday arrived, I found myself standing once again at the front door of my family's home. The grand Victorian mansion seemed more imposing than ever, its windows like watchful eyes. I adjusted my jacket, feeling the weight of the hidden voice recorder in my pocket, and rang the doorbell. My mother answered, her smile bright but her eyes wary. "Alex, darling, come in," she said, ushering me inside. "Everyone's waiting in the study." As I followed her through the familiar hallways, memories of my childhood flashed through my mind. Family dinners, holiday celebrations, moments of laughter and love. It was hard to reconcile those happy memories with the web of deceit I'd uncovered. The study was a room I'd always found intimidating as a child, with its dark wood paneling and shelves lined with leather-bound books. Now, as I entered, it felt like stepping into the lion's den. My father sat behind the imposing desk, while Uncle Robert and Aunt Maggie occupied the leather armchairs by the fireplace. Cousin Emily perched on the window seat, her face a mask of polite interest. "Alex," my father said, rising to greet me. "Good to see you, son. Shall we get down to business?" I nodded, taking a seat in front of the desk. My heart was pounding, but I forced myself to remain outwardly calm. "Before we start," I said, "I have a few questions about this agreement." Uncle Robert leaned forward, his brow furrowed. "Questions?" "I thought we explained everything at the party. It's a straightforward document, really." I met his gaze steadily. "Maybe so, but I'd like to understand a few things better. For instance, why now? Why is it so important that I sign this waiver at this particular moment?" A heavy silence fell over the room. I could almost see the gears turning in their heads as they tried to formulate a response. Finally, my father spoke. "Alex, we've always wanted what's best for you. This agreement, it's about giving you the freedom to make your own way in the world without the burden of family obligations." I couldn't help but laugh, the sound harsh in the tense atmosphere. "Freedom? Is that what you call asking me to sign away my inheritance?" Aunt Maggie stepped in, her voice soothing. "Darling, you have to understand. The family business, it's complex. There are considerations you might not be aware of, like the plan to consolidate the family wealth." I interrupted, watching their faces carefully. "Or the legal battle between Grandpa and Great-Uncle George all those years ago." The shock on their faces was almost comical. Emily gasped audibly, while Uncle Robert's face turned an alarming shade of red. "Where did you hear about that?" my father demanded, his composure slipping for the first time. I leaned back in my chair, feeling a surge of confidence. "I've done my homework, Dad. I know about the long-standing plan to create a family dynasty. I know about the manipulations, the secret deals. What I don't know is why you thought I'd just go along with it without asking questions." The room erupted into chaos. Aunt Maggie started making excuses, while Uncle Robert shouted about family loyalty. Emily just sat there, looking stunned. Through it all, my father remained silent, his eyes never leaving my face. When the noise died down, he finally spoke. "You're right, Alex. We should have been honest with you from the start. But you have to understand, everything we've done has been for the good of the family." I shook my head, disappointment weighing heavily on my heart. "No, Dad. It's been for the good of some members of the family, at the expense of others. That's not what family is supposed to be about." I stood up, pulling the waiver from my pocket. "I'm not signing this. Not now, not ever. And if you try to force the issue, I'm prepared to take this public. I wonder how the board of directors would feel about these family considerations you've been juggling." The threat hung in the air, heavy and undeniable. I watched as the realization dawned on their faces. They'd underestimated me, and now they were cornered. Uncle Robert was the first to break the silence. "You wouldn't dare," he growled. "You'd be destroying everything we've worked for." I met his gaze steadily. "Maybe it needs to be destroyed. Maybe we need to start over, build something that's actually about family, not just money and power." My mother, who had been quiet throughout the confrontation, suddenly stood up. "He's right," she said, her voice shaking slightly. "This has gone too far. We're tearing our family apart." The admission seemed to deflate the tension in the room. My father slumped in his chair, looking older than I'd ever seen him. Aunt Maggie dabbed at her eyes with a handkerchief, while Emily stared out the window, lost in thought. "So what happens now?" my father asked, his voice weary. I took a deep breath. "Now we talk. Really talk. No more secrets, no more hidden agendas. We figure out a way forward that's fair to everyone, not just a select few." It wasn't going to be easy. Years of mistrust and manipulation had left deep scars. But as I looked around the room at my family, flawed, human, but still my family, I felt a glimmer of hope. We spent the next few hours in intense discussion. Old grievances were aired, secrets were revealed, and slowly, painfully, we began to build a new understanding. It wasn't perfect. There were still moments of anger and accusation, but it was a start. As the sun began to set, casting long shadows across the study, we finally reached a tentative agreement. The waiver was torn up, and in its place, we drafted a new document, one that emphasized transparency, fairness, and true family values. When I finally left the house that evening, I felt as if a great weight had been lifted from my shoulders. The cool night air was refreshing after the stuffy atmosphere of the study. As I walked down the driveway, I heard footsteps behind me. It was Emily, her face pale in the moonlight. "Alex," she called out. "Wait." I paused, turning to face her. She hesitated for a moment, then spoke in a rush. "I just wanted to say, I'm sorry for everything. And thank you for being brave enough to stand up to them. To all of us." I nodded, accepting her apology. "It's not over yet," I warned her. "We've got a lot of work to do to fix this family." She smiled, a genuine smile this time. "I know, but at least now we're on the right path." As I drove home that night, my mind was whirling with everything that had happened. I knew the road ahead wouldn't be easy. Trust, once broken, is hard to rebuild. But for the first time in weeks, I felt a sense of hope. The deceptive agreement that had been meant to trap me had instead become the catalyst for change. It had forced us to confront the ugly truths we'd been hiding from, and in doing so, had given us a chance to create something better. I thought about Mike, waiting for my call to hear how everything had gone. I thought about Aunt B, who had been brave enough to tell me the truth when no one else would. And I thought about my family, flawed and complicated, but still mine. As I pulled into my driveway, I made a silent vow. We would build something new from the ashes of the old deceptions. It would take time, patience, and a lot of hard work. But we would do it together, as a real family should. The battle was over, but the real work was just beginning. And for the first time in a long time, I was looking forward to it. The weeks following the confrontation in my family study were a whirlwind of activity. We had agreed to work towards transparency and fairness, but putting those ideals into practice proved to be a challenging task. Every day seemed to bring new revelations, heated discussions, and painful truths that had long been buried. I found myself at the center of it all, acting as a mediator between various family factions. It was exhausting work, but I was determined to see it through. The future of our family depended on it. One crisp autumn morning, I was sitting in my favorite coffee shop, The Grind, trying to make sense of a stack of financial documents. The familiar smell of freshly brewed coffee and warm pastries was comforting as I pored over years of convoluted transactions and questionable business deals. "You look like you could use this," a voice said, startling me out of my concentration. I looked up to see Mike standing there, holding out a steaming mug of coffee. I smiled gratefully, pushing aside some papers to make room for him. "Thanks, Mike. I feel like I'm drowning in numbers here." He sat down across from me, his brow furrowed with concern. "How's it going? Any progress with the family situation?" I sighed, running a hand through my hair. "Yes and no. We're talking more openly now, which is good. But the more we dig into the family's finances, the more complicated it gets. There are layers upon layers of deals and arrangements that go back decades." Mike nodded sympathetically. "Sounds rough. But hey, at least you're making progress, right?" I was about to respond when my phone buzzed with a text message. It was from Emily, emergency family meeting called. Dad's office, 3 p.m. It's important. A sense of unease settled in my stomach. We hadn't had an emergency meeting since the confrontation. What could have happened? "I've got to go," I said, hurriedly gathering my papers. "Something's come up with the family." Mike stood up, concern etched on his face. "Want me to come with you? Moral support and all that." I hesitated for a moment, then nodded. Having a friend by my side might be just what I needed to face whatever was coming. As we drove to my father's office, I filled Mike in on the latest developments. The atmosphere in the car was tense, both of us acutely aware that we might be heading into another family showdown. My father's office was located in a sleek, modern building in the heart of the business district. As Mike and I walked through the lobby, I could feel the weight of expectations settling on my shoulders. Whatever was waiting for us upstairs, I knew it would be a turning point in our family story. The elevator ride to the top floor felt interminable. When the doors finally opened, we were greeted by the sight of my entire family gathered in the conference room. The tension in the air was palpable. My father sat at the head of the table, his face grave. Uncle Robert paced by the window, while Aunt Maggie wrung her hands nervously. Emily sat quietly in a corner, her eyes red-rimmed as if she'd been crying. "Alex," my father said, his voice tight. "Thank you for coming so quickly. And, Mike, isn't it? Thank you for supporting Alex through this. I took a seat at the table, Mike hovering uncertainly behind me. What's going on, Dad? Why the emergency meeting? My father took a deep breath, exchanging glances with Uncle Robert before speaking. We've discovered something. Something that changes everything. He slid a folder across the table to me. With trepidation, I opened it and began to read. As I scanned the documents inside, I felt the blood drain from my face. Is this real? I asked, my voice barely above a whisper. Uncle Robert nodded grimly. I'm afraid so. We've had our lawyers verify it. The documents revealed a truth more shocking than anything I had uncovered in my investigations. It turned out that the entire family fortune, the business empire we had fought so hard over, was built on a massive fraud perpetrated by my great-grandfather decades ago. But how? I asked, struggling to comprehend the magnitude of what I was reading. How did this stay hidden for so long? My father's shoulders sagged. Your great-grandfather was very careful. He covered his tracks well. But now, with all the digging we've been doing into the family's past, it's all come to light. The room fell into a heavy silence as the implications sank in. Everything we thought we knew about our family, our legacy, our wealth, it was all built on lies. So what does this mean for us? I finally asked, looking around at the shattered faces of my family members. Aunt Maggie spoke up, her voice trembling. If this gets out, we'll lose everything. The business, our reputation, everything. We could try to cover it up, Uncle Robert suggested, though he didn't sound convinced. Find a way to make it all go away. I stood up abruptly, my chair scraping loudly against the floor. No, I said firmly. No more lies. No more cover-ups. That's what got us into this mess in the first place. All eyes turned to me, a mix of fear, hope, and uncertainty in their gazes. But Alex, my mother pleaded, speaking for the first time since we arrived. If we come clean, it will destroy us. Everything we've worked for. I took a deep breath, feeling the weight of the moment. This was it, the tipping point. The decision we made now would define our family for generations to come. Maybe, I said slowly, it's time to redefine what we're working for. We've been so focused on preserving wealth and power that we've lost sight of what really matters, our integrity, our relationships with each other. I looked around the room, meeting each person's eyes in turn. We have a choice to make. We can try to bury this, to keep living a lie. Or we can come clean, face the consequences, and start rebuilding our family on a foundation of honesty. The silence that followed was deafening. I could see the internal struggle playing out on each face, the fear of losing everything battling with the desire to finally be free of the weight of deception. It was Emily who spoke first. Alex is right, she said, her voice quiet but firm. I'm tired of the lies, the constant fear of being found out. If we come clean now, at least we're doing it on our own terms. One by one, the others began to nod in agreement. Even Uncle Robert, who had always been the most pragmatic, some might say ruthless, of us all, seemed to deflate. It won't be easy, my father warned, though I could see a glimmer of relief in his eyes. We'll face legal consequences, financial ruin. But we'll face it together, I finished for him. As a family. A real family, not just business partners bound by secrets. As the reality of what we were about to do sank in, a strange mix of emotions filled the room. There was fear, certainly, and grief for the life we were leaving behind. But there was also a palpable sense of relief, as if a great burden had been lifted from all our shoulders. We spent the next few hours outlining a plan. We would consult with lawyers, prepare statements for the press, and reach out to those who would be most affected by the revelations. It would be a long, difficult road ahead, but for the first time in as long as I could remember, it felt like we were all truly on the same side. As the meeting wound down and people began to leave, each lost in their own thoughts, Mike pulled me aside. "You okay?" he asked, concern evident in his voice. I took a moment to really consider the question. Was I okay? My world had just been turned upside down. The wealth and privilege I had grown up with were about to disappear. The family name I had both resented and relied on would soon be synonymous with fraud and deceit. And yet, yeah, I said, surprising myself with how true it felt. Yeah, I think I am. For the first time in a long time, actually. Mike nodded, understanding in his eyes. Because now you can finally move forward, right? No more looking over your shoulder, wondering what secrets are going to come out next. Exactly, I agreed. It's terrifying, but it's also freeing. As we left the office building and stepped out into the fading afternoon light, I felt a sense of possibility that I hadn't experienced in years. The road ahead would be tough, there was no doubt about that. But we would face it together, with honesty and integrity. The tipping point had come, and we had chosen the harder path. But it was the right path, and that made all the difference. The days following our decision to come clean about the family's fraudulent past were a blur of activity. We had lawyers working around the clock, PR specialists crafting statements, and family members reaching out to contacts in an attempt to soften the blow that was to come. Through it all, I found myself at the center of a storm I had helped create, yet felt powerless to control. It was a crisp Monday morning when we decided to make our public announcement. The venue was a conference room at a downtown hotel, neutral ground that wouldn't be associated with our soon-to-be-tarnished family name. As I stood before the gathered crowd of journalists, cameras flashing and microphones thrust forward, I felt a moment of panic. Was this really the right decision? I glanced to my left, where my father stood, his face a mask of grim determination. To my right, Uncle Robert, looking years older than he had just a week ago. Behind me, the rest of the family, a united front for perhaps the first time in our history. Taking a deep breath, I stepped up to the podium. "Good morning," I began, my voice steadier than I felt. "Thank you all for coming. We've called this press conference to make an announcement that will come as a shock to many of you. It certainly came as a shock to us." The room fell silent, all eyes fixed on me. I could feel the weight of generations of secrets pressing down on my shoulders. For decades, the Thompson family has been respected in this community as successful business leaders and philanthropists. Today, we're here to tell you that the foundation of that success was built on a lie. A murmur rippled through the crowd. I saw pens scribbling furiously in notepads, cameras zooming in on my face. There was no going back now. We have recently uncovered evidence that our great-grandfather, William Thompson, engaged in a massive fraud scheme that formed the basis of our family fortune. This fraud has been perpetuated, unknowingly by most of us, for generations. The murmur turned into a roar. Journalists shouted questions, cameras flashed incessantly. I held up a hand, asking for silence. We understand that this revelation will have far-reaching consequences, not just for our family, but for our employees, business partners, and the many charitable organizations we've been involved with over the years. We are here today to take full responsibility for these actions and to face whatever consequences may come. What followed was a grueling tower session of questions and answers. We laid out the details of the fraud as we understood them, explained how it had remained hidden for so long, and outlined our plans to make amends. Through it all, I watched as the faces of the journalists transformed from shock to disbelief to a kind of grudging respect for our honesty. As we left the hotel, dodging more questions and camera flashes, I felt a strange mix of exhaustion and relief. The secret was out. Whatever happened next, at least we were no longer living a lie. The aftermath of our revelation was as brutal as we had anticipated. The stock price of our company plummeted. Longtime business partners distanced themselves from us. The charity boards we sat on asked us to step down. Our name, once synonymous with success and philanthropy, became a cautionary tale overnight. The legal consequences were swift and severe. Investigations were launched, assets were frozen, and indictments were handed down. My father and Uncle Robert, as the heads of the family business, bore the brunt of the legal assault. Watching them being led away in handcuffs was one of the most difficult moments of my life. Yet, amidst the chaos and destruction, I began to notice something unexpected. People were reaching out, not to condemn us, but to offer support. Old friends who had drifted away over the years called to check in. Employees, despite facing an uncertain future, sent messages of encouragement. Even some of the journalists who had covered our story reached out privately to commend our decision to come clean. One afternoon, about a week after the press conference, I found myself back at the grind, seeking solace in the familiar surroundings. As I nursed a cup of coffee, staring blankly at the wall, I heard a voice beside me. "Mind if I join you?" I looked up to see Sarah, a former classmate from college. We had never been close, but I remembered her as someone who had always been kind. "Sure," I said, gesturing to the empty chair across from me. She sat down, regarding me with a mix of curiosity and compassion. "I saw the news," she said simply. "How are you holding up?" I let out a bitter laugh. "About as well as you'd expect for someone whose entire life just imploded." Sarah nodded, her expression thoughtful. "What you did, it was incredibly brave. Not many people would have the courage to come clean like that, knowing what it would cost them." Her words caught me off guard. In the whirlwind of the past week, I hadn't really stopped to think about our actions in those terms. "I don't know if it was brave," I said slowly. "It just felt like the only choice we could live with." "That's what makes it brave," Sarah insisted. "You chose integrity over comfort, truth over wealth. That counts for something." As we continued to talk, I felt something shift inside me. For the first time since the revelation, I began to see our situation not just as a catastrophe, but as an opportunity. An opportunity to rebuild, to redefine who we were as a family and as individuals. Over the next few months, that seed of an idea grew into action. We sold off assets to pay restitution to those who had been harmed by our family's fraud. We worked with prosecutors, providing all the information we had to ensure that justice was served. Those of us not facing legal charges threw ourselves into community service, determined to make amends in whatever way we could. It wasn't easy. There were days when the weight of what we had lost, our wealth, our status, our family name, felt overwhelming. There were arguments and recriminations, moments of doubt and despair. But through it all, we clung to the truth that had set us free, even as it tore our old lives apart. 1 year to the day after our public revelation, we held another press conference. This time, it wasn't in a fancy hotel, but in a community center where many of us had been volunteering. The crowd was smaller, the cameras fewer, but the atmosphere was charged with a different kind of energy. As I stood at the podium once again, I looked out at the faces before me. Journalists, yes, but also community members, employees who had stuck with us through the turmoil, even some of the investigators who had worked on our case. "A year ago, I began. We stood before you and shattered the illusion of who we were. Today, we're here to tell you who we're becoming." I went on to outline the work we had been doing, the restitution paid, the community services performed, the steps we were taking to rebuild our lives and our relationships on a foundation of honesty and integrity. "We know that 1 year of good deeds doesn't erase decades of fraud," I acknowledged. "We're not here asking for forgiveness or for our old lives back. We're here to make a commitment to this community, to each other, and to ourselves. A commitment to continue on this path, to keep working to make things right, no matter how long it takes." As I spoke, I saw nods of approval, even a few smiles. It wasn't universal. There were still plenty of skeptical looks, but it was a start. After the conference, as we were packing up to leave, a young woman approached me. She introduced herself as the daughter of one of our former employees, someone who had lost their job in the fallout from our revelation. "I came here today ready to hate you," she said bluntly. "But listening to you, seeing the work you've been doing, I think I understand now. You're trying to make things right. It doesn't fix everything, but it's something." Her words stayed with me long after she had gone. They encapsulated everything we had been through, everything we were still going through. It didn't fix everything, but it was something. And something, I was learning, could be the start of everything. As I left the community center that day, walking out into the bright afternoon sunlight, I felt a sense of peace that had eluded me for the past year. The road ahead was still long and uncertain, but for the first time, I felt truly confident that we were on the right path. The shattering revelation that had destroyed our old lives had also given us the chance to build something new, something real, something honest. And that, I realized, was worth more than all the wealth and status we had lost. 5 years had passed since that fateful press conference where we laid bare our family's darkest secret. The journey since then had been arduous, filled with challenges I never could have imagined, but also with moments of growth and unexpected joy. I found myself once again at the grind, the coffee shop that had been a constant through all the upheaval. The familiar aroma of freshly ground beans and the low hum of conversation were comforting as I waited for Mike to arrive. So much had changed, but this place remained reassuringly the same. "Hey, stranger," Mike's voice broke through my reverie. He slid into the seat across from me, 2 steaming mugs in hand. "Thought you could use this." I smiled, gratefully accepting the coffee. "Thanks, Mike. Some things never change, huh?" He grinned back, but I could see the concern in his eyes. "So, big day tomorrow. How are you holding up?" I took a deep breath, considering the question. Tomorrow marked the official end of my father's prison sentence. After 5 years, he would finally be coming home. Honestly, I'm not sure, I admitted. It's been so long and so much has happened. I'm excited to have him back, but I'm also nervous, I guess. Mike nodded understandingly. "That's natural, man. It's a big change. But hey, look how far you've all come. You've got this." His words brought a flood of memories from the past 5 years. The initial shock and chaos after our revelation had gradually given way to a new normal. We had lost our wealth, our status, and for some of us, our freedom. But in their place, we had gained something far more valuable, a sense of purpose and a newfound appreciation for honesty and integrity. I thought about Emily, who had thrown herself into advocacy work for white-collar crime victims. She had turned her own pain and guilt into a force for positive change, and I couldn't have been prouder of her. Aunt Maggie had surprised us all by starting a small bakery. She had always loved to bake, but it had been just a hobby in our old life. Now it was her livelihood, and the joy it brought her was evident to anyone who visited her shop. Even Uncle Robert, who had struggled the most with our fall from grace, had found a new path. After serving a shorter sentence, he had become involved in prison reform efforts, using his experience to push for more rehabilitation programs. As for me, I had gone back to school, finishing the degree I had abandoned when I got caught up in the family business. Now, I was working for a nonprofit that provided financial literacy education to underprivileged communities. The irony wasn't lost on me, using the knowledge I had gained from our family's financial misdeeds to help others avoid similar pitfalls. Earth to Alex, Mike's voice pulled me back to the present. "Where'd you go just now?" I shook my head, smiling ruefully. "Just thinking about everything that's happened. Sometimes it still feels surreal, you know." Mike leaned back in his chair, his expression thoughtful. "I get that. But Alex, you should be proud. What you and your family have done, it's pretty incredible." I raised an eyebrow. "Incredible? We committed fraud on a massive scale, Mike." "No," he said firmly. "Your great-grandfather committed fraud. What you did was own up to it, face the consequences, and then spend years working to make things right. That's the incredible part." His words hit me hard. It was true that we had worked tirelessly to make amends, but I had never really stopped to consider the magnitude of what we had done. The choice to come clean had been just the beginning. The real work had been in the years that followed, the daily choice to keep pushing forward, to keep trying to do better. As we continued to talk, the conversation shifted to the future. Tomorrow wouldn't just mark my father's return, it would also be the start of a new chapter for our entire family. "Have you thought about what comes next?" Mike asked. "I mean, with your dad coming home and all." I nodded slowly. "We've talked about it a bit. He's different now. Prison changed him, but I think for the better. He wants to get involved in the work I'm doing, maybe start a mentorship program for at-risk youth." The idea of working alongside my father, using our experiences to help others, filled me with a mix of excitement and apprehension. Our relationship had been strained for so long, even before the revelation of our family's fraud. But through letters, phone calls, and visits over the past 5 years, we had begun to rebuild something new, something more honest and real than what we had before. As the afternoon wore on and the coffee shop began to fill with the after-work crowd, Mike and I said our goodbyes. He pulled me into a hug before we parted. "Remember," he said, "whatever happens tomorrow, you've got people in your corner." "You're not alone in this." His words stayed with me as I made my way home. The small apartment I now lived in was a far cry from the mansion I grew up in, but it felt more like home than that grand house ever did. As I walked in, my eyes fell on a framed photo on the bookshelf, a recent picture of our family at Emily's wedding. We were all there, even my father, who had been granted a day release for the occasion. Our smiles were smaller than they might have been in the old days, but they were genuine. That night, as I lay in bed, unable to sleep, I found myself reflecting on the long, difficult journey we had been through. The pain, the loss, the struggle, it had all been real and at times overwhelming. But so too had been the growth, the healing, and the redemption. I thought about the people we had hurt with our family's fraud and the efforts we had made to make amends. It would never be enough to fully right the wrongs of the past, but it was something. And that something had become the foundation of our new lives. As the first light of dawn began to creep through my window, I finally drifted off to sleep, my mind at peace. Whatever challenges tomorrow might bring with my father's return, we would face them together, as a family rebuilt on a foundation of truth and integrity. The next morning, I woke early, a mixture of anticipation and nervousness coursing through me. I got dressed carefully, choosing clothes that were neat but not flashy, a far cry from the designer suits I used to wear, but comfortable in their simplicity. The drive to the prison was quiet, the roads nearly empty in the early morning hours. As I pulled into the parking lot, I saw Emily and Aunt Maggie already waiting. We exchanged hugs, drawing strength from each other's presence. "Ready?" Emily asked softly. I took a deep breath and nodded. "As I'll ever be." Together, we walked towards the prison entrance. The process of signing in and waiting seemed to take forever, yet passed in a blur. And then, suddenly, he was there. My father looked older, his hair grayer, and his face more lined than I remembered. But his eyes were clear and bright as they met mine. For a moment, we all stood frozen, the weight of the past 5 years hanging between us. Then, without a word, he opened his arms. I stepped forward, and as we embraced, I felt something inside me shift and settle. This wasn't an ending, I realized. It was a beginning. As we left the prison, stepping out into the bright morning sunlight, I felt a sense of hope stronger than any I had experienced in years. The road ahead would not be easy. There would be challenges to face, trust to rebuild, and a new life to navigate. But we would do it together, bound not by secrets and lies, but by the shared experience of falling, learning, and rising again. Our family's redemption was not a single moment, but an ongoing journey. It was in the daily choices to be honest, to make amends, to do better. It was in the relationships we were rebuilding, stronger now for having been broken and remade. As we drove away from the prison, my father turned to me with a small smile. "So," he said, his voice rough with emotion, "tell me about this work you're doing. I'd like to hear everything." And as I began to talk, sharing my passion for the financial literacy program and my hopes for the future, I realized that this moment of genuine connection and shared purpose was the truest wealth we had ever possessed. Our family's journey from illusion to truth, from shattering revelation to hard-won redemption, had been long and painful. But it had led us here, to this moment of new beginnings and real, honest hope. And that, I knew, was worth more than any fortune we had lost.